Thanks everyone for coming. Today we have author George Dyson here to talk about his upcoming book, brand new book, Turings Cathedral, The Origins of the Digital Universe. The creation stories of revolutionary technologies is pretty deeply embedded in American culture. We all learned very young about Benjamin Franklin's experiments with electricity and Thomas Edison's work on the light bulb. However, the story of the invention of the computer, which is arguably going to have a far greater impact, even though it's based functionally on those earlier technologies, is largely missing from our collective knowledge. Dyson's new work sheds important light on this and on this creation of this wonderful invention and how the digital universe exploded in the aftermath of World War II. So, besides going deep into the early history of the computer, Turings Cathedral also offers a series of provocative suggestions as to where the digital universe may be headed next. And so without further ado, let's welcome George Dyson.
Thank you. It's great to be here and see everybody working. I come here every summer for Sci-Fu, but in the old days of Sci-Fu, we mingled with the Google people. That was part of the idea, but now Sci-Fu is sort of isolated and we don't really see the people who are working. We're separated from the Sci-Fu people. But I was here 7 years ago. In fact, that's where the title of this book comes from, and I'll explain that a little later. And I'm coming to this, I just have to say this in all honesty, from totally left field. I'm not a computer scientist. I dropped out of high school at age 16 and have no credentials, but I'm interested in things and I get curious about them and sort of obsessed. So I actually, by trade, I'm a boat builder. I design and build boats. And I am best known far beyond anything in computing history or anything else because I lived in a treehouse for 3 years that was 95 feet up in a Douglas fir tree. So that's halfway. The bottom of the tree would be down about the floor. That's the house. And in that treehouse, I read lots of books. I had time on a scale that no one can imagine today. No email, no distractions. I read entire 6,000 pages of Cook's journals one winter. And then I came down. And so I'm going to thank a few people. The book that I'm here for was published yesterday, so it's still a new thing. First of all, my sister Esther, who some of you probably know, she's played a role in a lot of the startups here in Silicon Valley. She actually, I think, had some of the original investment in Google at the very beginning. There she is with her friend Bill in 1984. And Esther was very kind to sort of extract her brother from the Canadian wilderness and bring me down to her. At that time, she produced the annual conference for the computer. It was actually called, at the beginning, the Rosen Electronics Forum. It dealt mainly with semiconductors, and suddenly the main application for semiconductors became the personal computer. So she introduced me to this world, and I got to see what was going on. And it brought me back to my childhood. When I was a young child, there was a guy named, my father worked at this place called the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, but not part of the university. My mother worked there too. And most of those scientists were doing completely boring things. They worked in pencil and paper, and maybe they wrote on the chalkboard and erased it the next day. But Johnny von Neumann had a building out back where he was building a computer. And it was not the first computer. It's impossible to get the people, discussing and trying to sell this book to not say George's book is about the first computer. It's not the first computer. There were many, many computers before this computer. It was one of the first computers to have a two-dimensional speed of light address matrix, which is the world that you guys are all living in today, where you can give a numerical coordinate and get back a string of bits. That was the thing that was new, and that's what von Neumann saw. The model was Alan Turing's one-dimensional model, and von Neumann made it two-dimensional. That's sort of the key moment in history I'm trying to look at, not who invented the first computer. We're going to argue about that forever, and it's, we'll learn by arguing about it, but it sort of gets pointless after a while. But so in 1984, just after I came down from the treehouse, I wrote this piece about von Neumann, trying to give it to the people at my sister's conference who really were not interested. They were interested in, whether DOS, which sort of flavor of DOS would win next year. So nothing happened, but eventually that became this book. Darwin Among the Machines, which was probably too far ahead of its time, but still in print, and looks at this very large question of where did this digital universe come from on the long time. In this book, I take it back to Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century. And one of the people who appreciated this book was Charles Shimoni from Xerox PARC, right across the street here. That's Charles in Budapest, Hungary, with a holographic bust of Johnny von Neumann, who's a national hero in Hungary. And it was Charles who said, George, you should go dig this stuff out. He sort of sensed that I had a passion sort of for excavating digital archaeology. And so he's the guy who pulled the strings to open the doors to the Institute for Advanced Study, where their archives had been kept closed to outside researchers since 1946. And I happened to be with Charles when he came to Google for the first time. We were riding in a bus together to an event here, and we drove up. He was still at Microsoft then. We drove up in front of Building 43, and what he said, which I can probably repeat now, not at the time, but because he's left Microsoft, he said, "Oh shit, Building 43, we're screwed," and because he thought you guys already had 43 buildings, and you were only 2 years old, right? So Charles set me on this path 10 years ago to go try and find the documents of what really happened. And the path always ends if you're interested in history. You start reading books, and they're like what they call gateway drugs. Books lead you to libraries, and the libraries lead you to archives. And then the final sort of the heroine of the whole thing is eventually you get to stuff that is not even in the archives, and that's what I do now. So this is the filing cabinet belonging to Johnny von Neumann's daughter in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's always next to the water heater in the basement, and all John von Neumann's papers went to the Library of Congress, but this filing cabinet didn't. And his daughter said, you should come to Ann Arbor maybe and take a look. Nobody had looked. And I opened and to me as a historian, the most interesting sort of dark period of technology history is like between 1937, just before World War II, and Sputnik. After Sputnik, we sort of started documenting everything really well, but there's sort of a dark period where we don't really know what happened. So I opened that bottom drawer, and it's all the letters back and forth in both directions between Johnny and Clary from 1937 to when he died in 1957. And von Neumann, when he built this machine, he needed to write the code for it. There was nobody who did that kind of thing, so he taught Clary how to write the code. So she wrote all the early codes, and these letters are all back and forth. He's at Los Alamos, she's in Washington, D.C. Here, she's at Aberdeen, where the ENIAC was, so she's writing codes for the ENIAC, and he's at Oak Ridge Laboratory, the nuclear laboratory in Tennessee. So all this stuff was there, half in Hungarian, that Béla Bolobás and his wife Gabriela translated for me. So that's the source of this book. Until then, I was sort of struggling. Then I had the raw material to really bring this story to life. And Clary was a fantastic writer, even though English was a second language. Her journals of coming to America and learning to code these computers and seeing it all are just, if you read the book, I think you'll find she's the voice that really keeps it all going. They're in Seattle at the University Towers Hotel. So he gets invited to give the dance lectures in 1940 at University of Washington, and they drive across America on Route 66 in his V8 Cadillac coupe, and it's all there in the journals. It's fantastic. They stop at a bar in Nevada, and a guy comes into the bar with a mule, and the bartender gives the mule a bucket of beer. And the other source of sort of real life to this story was a crazily brilliant Italian-Norwegian mathematical viral geneticist, Nils Al Baricelli, who the moment, even before von Neumann got the machine running, in 1959, Baricelli writes to von Neumann from Norway saying he wants to come and run numerical evolution experiments on this machine. And the machine is being built to do hydrogen bomb hydrodynamic calculations. And so von Neumann makes a deal, well, you can have the bomb guys sort of work all night, but they still fade out and go home at 2 or 3 in the morning. And Baricelli gets the machine the rest of the night. And he has a knack for keeping it, even with no engineers, he often keeps it going, until daylight. So now I've been working on this 5 years. I had a book contract for 2 years. What you get from a publisher is 2 years. So I'm now really 2 years overdue, and I still haven't started writing the book. And the publisher, they're going to cancel my contract. So I finally start writing this. Putting these slides together, I went and found, I could find the notebook. I wrote the first word. It was going to be called Baricelli's Universe, but then the publisher said, well, who's Baricelli? Nobody knows. So that's why Turing got the title. But if you, using the wonders of Photoshop, you can actually raise the contrast and see the second. So here, what's the first sentence I wrote? It's Princeton, New Jersey, where this took place. In summer, it's so hot and humid that the atmosphere has been described as, quote, like the inside of a dog's mouth. It's essentially, it's the worst place in the world to try and build an electrostatic memory computer, but they did. And that sentence actually survived. It's the opening sentence of chapter 2. So I had the first sentence in the book, but no book. Now I work in old bar in Bellingham, Washington, so I could lay out, one by one the chapters. So Turing comes into the picture because, the conception of all this goes back to Turing. Turing came to Princeton in 1936. He stayed for 2 years. He worked fairly closely with Johnny von Neumann, who always credited Turing. Von Neumann always said the original idea was Turing's. All I did was, implement it. And why we now have an incredibly divisive battle going on between people who think the Americans get too much credit and people who think the British get too much credit. And at the time, both sides were absolutely collaborating with each other. There was no rivalry until sort of among the historians who came in later. So in 1950, Alan Turing, who's very interested in the whole idea of what we now call artificial intelligence, he starts asking the question, can machines think? And immediately people are saying, oh no, don't go there, that's sort of playing God, and only God and people can think. How could machines think? And he answers that question, I think, in a very tactful way. That when we build intelligent machines, we're not creating souls, we are creating the mansions for the souls that only he can create. And I think that's how I feel. And then it's 2005, Chris DiBona, who invites me here to Google, because 2005 is 60 years from when this project started. So I came and gave a similar afternoon talk on that anniversary. And when I walked in here, I got sort of the engineering tour of what you're doing in the basement and other places. I saw the first of the Mars data coming in and stuff. And as I walked out after giving the talk, I just had this phrase came in my mind. This is not what you're doing here at Google. That's not Turing's mansion. This is Turing's Cathedral. And that's where the title of this book actually comes not from this one. I gave the talk in the cafeteria. It was very bad acoustics, but that's the source of Turing's Cathedral. And that's not in the book. That's sort of the backstory that people don't know. The front story is just cathedrals are built by large numbers of anonymous people, and that's how computing is. It's everybody's putting a little brick here, a little brick there, and in the end, you get this cathedral. So finally, I've sort of got the beginnings of a book. The subtitle was A Creation Myth. I didn't want people to think I didn't want to be held to telling the truth. I just wanted to tell the best of my knowledge, what I think happened. I'm not interested so much in who was first, but what really happened. And we lack we live in this digital universe, but we don't really have a common creation myth of how it started. And there's 3 things that, as an author, that you're terrified of hearing from your publisher. And the first one is the rejection letter. I'm sorry, it's a lovely book, but we can't publish it. The second one is you're late and we're going to cancel your contract. And the third one is we have a cover and we think you will like it. And every time I got that message from a publisher, it's been just horribly disappointing. I mean, some of the covers I've had for my books are just excruciating. But in this case, it was true. Pantheon, their designer, Peter Mendelsohn, came up with this cover that was so brilliant. I mean, I loved it. Nothing got changed. So the cover is punched like the punch cards that ran the machine. So the digital, there's the transition between analog and digital, and it's there in the physical cover of the book. And you won't get that in an ebook. So there it is. So, in 1912, Turing was born exactly 100 years ago. Sarah Turing, his mom, was 5 months pregnant, and we're counting down to the centenary of Alan Turing, who deserves all the, he had a tragic life. I disagree. People saying he did commit suicide. We think he committed suicide. We're not sure, but he died of cyanide poisoning under ambiguous circumstances at age 41. And the opening page of this book is a tribute to Leibniz, who in 1697 reminded us that it was not made for those who sell oil or sardines, which, modern translation would be Google isn't all about ads. There's other stuff going on. And what I'm going to do now, because the book has all these, they kept the 82 illustrations I gave them. I'm just going to show you the illustrations in color, but if you have the book, they'll be there in black and white. So they're all very carefully chosen. That is the dawn of the digital universe, of the modern digital. I mean, we certainly had, we had punch cards long before that, but this is one of the first of these electronic memory tubes where the bits actually are charged spots on the face of the tube. Now we have solid state memory and we display it on a display. In this case, the actual memory were spots of light on the face of a glass tube. So you could see, there were 40 of these tubes, you could see the computation proceeding. This is a scrap of paper I found in another one of these basements by the water heaters, Julian Bigelow's basement. It was crumpled up and saved. It says, orders, let a word 40 BD, so that dates it from before they started using the word bit, binary digits, be 2 orders. Each order equals C of A command, and they give the coordinates and an address. And that, to me, that's Moses coming down from the mountain and saying, let there be the command line. And now, we take that completely for granted. How could we, was there ever a world without command lines? Well, there was, and that's the beginning of it. And the engineers, no one was supposed to talk about the fact that they were actually designing hydrogen bombs, but these are the late night logbooks. So this is significant because this is March 3rd, 1953. So this is the first night that Baricelli starts running his first, he called them numerical symbiote organisms. Now we would call them digital organisms. So he stops and turns it over to the AEC bomb people, and that's the log entry of that transition. So they were, on the one hand, which is why von Neumann was so amazing, that he was trying to build a device that could destroy all life on planet Earth. The hydrogen bomb is the most evil thing that has ever been created. And at the same time, he was talking about creating a new kind of digital life. And so these two very opposite things were going on in the same, it was 5 kilobytes of memory was all they had. That's Alan Turing at age 5 and Johnny von Neumann at age 7. So these very much complementary personalities between these two people. And so it irritated me how all these historians still are arguing about what did von Neumann take from Turing? Why didn't he give Turing credit? Did he read Turing's paper? People saying, oh no, he didn't read Turing's paper. So I decided I would go look in von Neumann's library. Turing's paper was published in the Proceedings of the London Mathematical Society. That's the volume it was in. When you go to the Institute Library, all the volumes are absolutely untouched, mint. They've hardly been opened except volume 42. And it's clearly, it's been read so many times, it's completely fallen apart. They didn't have Xerox machines, so they just, and the engineers I spoke with, the few that were left, said, von Neumann, we all had to read that paper. That's what we were doing, was building a Turing machine. So I think that answers the question. And Turing was working in England. I mean, he was in Princeton, but he went back to help with the war effort. Essentially, he saved, I think he saved England from being conquered by Germany because he helped break the Nazi U-boat codes. We forget how desperate England was. And we were sending supplies to England, but we hadn't entered the war yet. And the Germans were sinking the supply ships. And so he also, or the engineers with him, built what was effectively a Turing machine called the Colossus, built largely by Tommy Flowers, who came from the Post Office Electronic Research Station. And it was able to compare coded sequences stored in vacuum tube memory with the intercepted coded sequences stored on paper tape. And so it was, in fact, you could say this was the archetype of a search engine, searching for patterns in data. There's Turing getting on a bus. He was a long-distance runner. He's going to a marathon. And von Neumann with his machine that was built by Julian Bigelow, and it had 20 of these tubes on each side. So each of these cans had a 32 by 32 array of bits, and there were 40 cans. So effectively, they had a matrix that was 32 by 32 by 40 bits, which is 5 kilobytes. That's 1/2 second of an MP3. And they did this in the middle of New Jersey, which is also sort of the backstory of all this is always fascinating. So that's the headwaters of the river, and New York is here and Philadelphia was there, and this has been settled sort of in the 17th century. And a guy named Henry Greenland opens a tavern there at the Arrow. So people going back and forth on that trail can stop and get a beer and change their horses or spend the night. And then the Quakers, led by William Penn, they're trying to get as far away from New York and as Philadelphia as possible. So they also settle there, and they build a Quaker meeting house. So you have this tavern, and you have the Quaker meeting house. And the tavern became Princeton University. And the Quaker meeting house, that land, became the Institute for Advanced Study. It only changed hands twice from the Penn family to the Olden family to the Institute, which then they built this fabulous headquarters in sort of the Googleplex of its time. And this was built in 1939, right when things really went bad in Europe. So this became a refuge for all the mainly Jewish scientists fleeing Germany who were given refuge here. And it was incredible stupidity on the part of the Germans to kick out the smartest people who were largely given refuge by Oswald Veblen, who was American, but saw what was happening and set up a committee to aid refugee scientists and sort of broke all the rules like you guys probably do with H-1 visas and stuff to get these people in, despite, we forget that at that time Princeton University had a quota against Jewish faculty and Jewish students. So the Institute played a very strong role. That's Norbert Wiener, who sort of coined the word or took the word from Ampere, but then recoined the word cybernetics. Abraham Flexner, the Institute was his idea, and it was based on the concept of the usefulness of useless knowledge, that if you just let people work on whatever they want, they're going to come up with useful things. I think what the policy here is still 10%, or is it 20? 20, okay, so this was 100%. It's all... it's all vacation. And the founders, the people who put in the money, they were sort of the Bezos family of department store owners, the Bambergers who believed in that this would further the cause of social justice, which in a way maybe it has, if the computer actually did what they intended. The first 6 math professors, including Einstein and Hermann Weyl, Oswald Veblen, Johnny von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern, who together formulated the modern version of game theory of games and economic behavior. And Einstein and Gödel, Kurt Gödel, the logician, who gets, in the standard histories, gets no credit, has no involvement with computing at all, but actually his office was above von Neumann. And I think in many ways the whole concept of numerical addressing, that you could address strings of bits, manipulate the numerical addresses, and then be manipulating the underlying strings is very similar to what Gödel did in his sort of incompleteness proof. And I think actually he contributed more than we think. Johnny von Neumann at age 11 with his cousin. He loved weapons from the beginning. So here they're visiting a Austro-Hungarian artillery gun emplacement in 1915, and he's the kid sitting on the barrel of the cannon. They're at a wedding with his cousin's wedding. So, this stuff is all in there because it's so much of understanding why this happened and how it happened is that what was going on in Budapest between World War I and World War II. Why did all these, why did Johnny von Neumann, Eugene Wigner, Leo Szilard, Edward Teller, Paul Erdős, they all came out of the same group of people in Hungary and ended up here. So von Neumann was at the position at the University of Berlin, but then he saw what was going to happen and left early, resigned his position, had a tremendous, sense of humor. That's Princeton, that's a cocktail party in the 1930s. So all these people are from Budapest. That's H.P. Robertson, who at that time was teaching quantum physics to Alan Turing. Alan Turing was his student. And, I was there as a child. I don't ever remember meeting Johnny von Neumann. He had left to go work for the Atomic Energy Commission while I was still like 2 years old. But I remember a cocktail party at my mom's when I was stuck in a crib. And I was very unhappy. And a really cheerful mathematician came in the room and talked to me and gave me a sip of his drink. And I like to think, maybe that was my contact with von Neumann. And these guys had so much fun at Los Alamos. These are theoretical mathematicians who never touched real hardware, and then suddenly they're allowed to play with high explosives in machine shops. Dick Feynman, Stan Ulam, 1949. The photo taken by Nick Metropolis, who developed the Monte Carlo algorithm. So they were intoxicated. Once Los Alamos was over, they weren't going to go back to teaching calculus or anything like that. They wanted to do, and the computer, that was the next thing after. So they all got involved with the ENIAC, which was, oddly enough, it was what we would call a multiple core processor, where there were 20 parallel processors working together, and then they rewired it to turn it into more of a serial mode. But it started out as a multiple core architecture. And von Neumann and the other engineers put together this little book explaining how to build a better computer, things like an adder that we take totally for granted. They had to figure it out, the memory, the input, output. Vladimir Zworykin, another amazing character, a Russian emigre who escaped through the Russian Arctic to America, got a job in New York and ended up bringing television to it. He's really one of the two people who brought television to America. And he and von Neumann partnered together. So the origins of this project, like meeting number one is in Zworykin's office. And you can see the fifth person down is John Tukey, the statistician, the guy who gets tired of saying binary digit and finally says, come on, let's call it a bit, guys. And we get bit. Bernetta Miller, no institution functions without a secretary who keeps everything going and solves the problems and gets things done. She was the fifth person in the United States to get a pilot's license, and then her eyesight started going bad, so she ended up getting a job at the Institute and ran things. So she did the hard work of keeping the computer project supplied and so on. And Oppenheimer fired her because I think she knew too much. Akravo Kondopria Emanuelidis, Greek, so she was 16 years old in Philadelphia. Her father couldn't read or write English, and her guidance counselor told her she couldn't go to college. There was no hope. But there was this project at the University of Pennsylvania maybe she could work on, and it was the ENIAC. So she became the ENIAC project secretary and did such a good job that Herman Goldstine and Johnny von Neumann brought her to the Institute at age 17. And if you're around this evening, I'm doing a discussion at the Computer History Museum, and she's going to be there. She's one of the last person left who really is still, because she was so young at the time. She lives in Los Angeles, and she's come up for this tonight and then another thing in San Francisco tomorrow. And that's quite amazing, because there's still somebody left who, all those famous reports establishing the architecture of all the machines used, she's the person who typed those reports and got every word right. And she proofread my book. It was just fantastic having her So she's a lot of fun. I mean, she didn't have her own computer till 2009. Her daughter got her a Mac. And some of the guys, Norman Phillips, was doing weather predictions. So they worked on a bunch of problems, including Jerry Estrin, who's two of his daughters. One is real principal in Cisco, and Judy and Deborah Estrin are both very active in the, what's happened in the next generation of computing. This machine was built with the expectation, what Zworykin promised, that RCA would build something called the Selectron. So this is like, you heard about how, dinosaur, there's somewhere there's a dinosaur, the first dinosaur that has feathers, and that's the mythical transition between analog and digital. That's a analog vacuum tube with a 4096-bit digital memory inside, a pure digital matrix. And so it's the ancestor of your USB stick. But it never got built in time. But they built the machine waiting for these things to plug in, and then they never materialized. So then they did this strange hack with the cathode ray tubes. But the architecture was established for this, and that's, I think, largely the reason that we moved into the solid state age so fast, that when Fairchild and those people started coming up with solid state devices in memory, the architecture had been expecting that from the very beginning. It had been waiting for it for 20 or 30 years, so it just could plug right in. In fact, my new Mac here has a solid state drive, so it's actually it's a Selectron machine. So in England, in Manchester, where a very clever group of British people were also including Turing, they got a machine running way before the people in Princeton. That's Frederick C. Williams and Tom Kilburn. They did the work of using these spots of charge on the face of an oscilloscope tube to work as memory. And then the Princetonians went over there and adopted and improved the idea. They made it random access. So that's one of these. There's a standard War surplus oscilloscope tube with an amplifier on the top. So you have to amplify the signal 30,000 times, and then if you're lucky, you can distinguish between a 0 and a 1 in this tiny time interval of 0.7 microseconds. Julian Bigelow was the engineer who physically built the machine. It was I think it's an absolute work of art. I mean, it was built like a 40-cylinder diesel engine with overhead valves, intake and out. I mean, it was an engine. It was an engine for numbers, and there's one bit each of 1,040-bit words in each cylinder. It was just an absolutely brilliant design, as long when it was working. And there it is. It's now, unfortunately, it was given to the Smithsonian, but they don't even have it on display. It's off in one of these closed warehouses in Maryland or somewhere. It should be, and I hope someone will, if I do anything, succeed in anything, it might be to get, it should be in the Computer History Museum right here. They have space for it and be the perfect place for it. Julian Bigelow, Herman Goldstine, Robert Oppenheimer, who we think was against the hydrogen bomb, but actually was being quite supportive, and John von Neumann, all the engineers who helped, a lot of women who did the coding. There was no place for them to live, so Bigelow, who would solve any problem, he went to upstate New York, a place called Mineville, and purchased these war surplus barracks and cut them in half and brought them down to Princeton by rail. That's the first magnetic drive, so that's the ancestor of your hard disk. It's magnetic recording wire on two bicycle wheels, and they got 90,000 bits per second input-output out of that thing. And that's what a 40-bit word looks like. I mean, it's amazing how they were able to solve real problems with sort of that bad a digital representation. So they're trying to get analog stuff to behave in a digital way. That's the very first prototype shift register. We think like shift register's been there forever, but somebody had to. So they went through about 7 different versions of shift registers before saying, okay, this is how it's going to be, and now that's how it is. A lot of the physical work was done by high school girls and students. They called Wireman, the people who actually had to do all the wiring and soldering. That's the wiring diagram for the shift register. So really brilliantly designed. Jim Pomerine with the pipe, and Julian Bigelow in the middle. Willis Ware, who's still alive, who played a big role, went from Princeton to Rand, and here he's explaining computer architecture. The first flow diagram that I've been able to find, maybe someday somebody will find another one, but this is in 1947. They're doing a Monte Carlo hydrogen bomb problem. And that's Stan Ulam, who Monte Carlo is sort of named after. He was a gambler. He's winning. That's the weekly poker game at Los Alamos. And that's Nick Metropolis, who we owe a huge debt to. I mean, he is one of the founding fathers of computer science, who's, again, never took a huge amount of credit for himself. Clary, Johnny's second wife, who was the champion figure skater of Hungary, national figure skating champion at age 14, paid no attention in school, but Johnny taught her to do the coding. That's their trip to Florida in his V8 Cadillac. And Stan Ulam and Françoise, who they both lost their entire families to the Holocaust in Europe and escaped to the United States. And you have to remember that when you try to understand why were these people working on these terrible, terrible weapons. They were working on these terrible weapons because they believed we had to have the strongest weapons on our side, and also, not publicly known, that's Nick Metropolis, his Los Alamos badge. Now he's playing first game of computer chess against the maniac at Los Alamos. You notice it's a 6x6 chessboard to make it simpler. So they play without bishops, and they called it anti-clerical chess. and the moves the input-output is still punched paper tape. So the machine was called Maniac for Mathematical and Numerical Integrator and Computer. But back to von Neumann, at Los Alamos, he worked closely with Klaus Fuchs, and they were actually working on a hydrogen bomb design. And then Klaus Fuchs turned out to be he was the Russian spy. He was the Russian plant. So von Neumann knew more than he could say. He really believed the Russians might be halfway there, and we had to catch up. So that's not to justify it is to justify what he did. So there's von Neumann at the Grand Canyon. And all his mule is facing the opposite direction of everybody else. And Clary. And Françoise Ulam, Claire Ulam, who's still alive, Stan Ulam, her dad, and who was from Poland, Johnny, and the Ulam. So all these people let me into their basements, and in the Ulam's sort of filing cabinet, this beautiful drawing by George Gamow of the actors in the hydrogen bomb drama in 1951. That's Joseph Stalin with the bomb, Oppenheimer looking like a saint, whether he was or not, and Stan Ulam spitting, Edward Teller in the middle, and George Gamow pulling the tail of a cat. And those drawings at the bottom, they have some significance as physics relating to the different approaches that were being taken to try and solve the hydrogen bomb problem. But nobody is left who can explain that to me. I don't understand it. Von Neumann and Werner von Braun, the rocket pioneer from Germany. Louis Fry Richardson, another thread of this whole thing. He was a meteorologist in England who worked on coding the hydrodynamic behavior of the atmosphere in a cellular model, which is how we actually do it today. He said we would need 64,000 human computers to do the partial differential equations as fast as the weather itself, and that's about what really happened. And then he answered the artificial intelligence question. Do we have artificial intelligence or not? Sure we do. It's just a question of how much. So this is a non-deterministic circuit. You can't predict what state it's going to be in, illustrating a mind having a will but capable of only two ideas. And that's, again, what I think you guys are doing here at Google. You're building an enormous non-deterministic circuit that instead of being only capable of two ideas, it's capable of all the ideas that people have ever had. And that's why the book is called Turings Cathedral. That's the expedition to do that's the first day they got a 24-hour weather prediction in less than 24 hours of processing time. And then it went very fast. And if you look at what they did, we're just about at the end, in this 5 kilobytes of memory, they worked on 5 big problems that were computationally very similar, but across completely different scales of time. So they worked on the question of nuclear explosions, where everything is over in a nanoseconds. That's it. Then you've got the answer. It may take weeks to get it, but the phenomenon itself is very short. Then von Neumann was extremely interested in shock waves, which are on the time scale of seconds to maybe minutes, but a short period of time. And then they worked on meteorology, which is over periods of hours, days, weeks. If it's months, then it sort of becomes climate. And Nils Baricelli showed up to work on biological evolution over periods of centuries, thousands of years. And another German refugee, Martin Schwarzschild, showed up and did a huge number of stellar evolution codes, looking at the evolution of stars over billions of years. So these 5 problems that span the sort of entire span of time in 5 kilobytes. It's quite amazing. These are all 5 problems that are still big problems today. Then in the middle is the scale is in seconds. So you've got 26 orders of magnitude, from 10 to the minus 8 to 10 to the 17th seconds. If you look at what is humanly perceivable, it's the blink of an eye, a third of a second to a 90-year lifespan. And the exact middle is 1 day, sort of one 8-hour day at work is like the middle of the perceivable universe of time. And that I'm puzzled by this. I don't know if is it because we are observers in the middle, it's always going to be symmetrical, but why are we in the middle of that time scale? And what computers have done, they've expanded our perception. We've gone from the blink of an eye as being the shortest interval to, we measure our memory in nanoseconds. So computers have just expanded our range in all directions. And the fast side gets all the attention because you needed fast computers to build bombs, to beat the other guy in high frequency trading and that kind of thing. But the long time scale, I think, is equally important. On the long term, it may be just as important to the survival of our species and civilization and even life on Earth that we have computers that monitor climate over hundreds of years and that kind of thing and make long-term decisions that we as human beings might not make for ourselves. So von Neumann was very interested in life and biology. There's Baricelli, who thought totally in binary. They didn't have no operating systems, no languages, nothing. It was just straight. Most of the guys worked in hexadecimal, but he worked straight raw binary code. So that's one of his universes. Alan Turing in 1951, where he is now building a commercial machine, and he insisted that commercial machine had to have a source of non-deterministic electronic noise. So the machine had to be able to guess. He didn't want a deterministic machine. He wanted a machine that was capable of making guesses and mistakes. Julian Bigelow, who would be 100 years old next year. As soon as von Neumann died, the Institute pulled the plug on the project. So 12 o'clock midnight, July 15th, 1958, that's the last entry in the logbook. And it was so sad for Julian, because Julian Bigelow, he had such a rapport with this machine. It was running fine. He had problems stacked up to work on, but they pulled the plug on him and it was over. In one of these basements, and I was digging around, there was a box that the surface of the box was World War II teleprinter manuals. I should have just left it, but I dug to the bottom of the box. In the bottom of the box was a box of punch cards with the entire source and output code for one of Baricelli's digital numerical organism experiments. And in there was a note, and the note from the engineer said, to Mr. Baricelli, there must be something about this code that you haven't explained yet. And when I found that sentence, it was like, walking in here and finding the title. I knew that was going to be the last. Those would be the last words in the book, because that's what Turing came to this problem in the beginning from. He was trying to answer a very abstract mathematical problem called the Entscheidungsproblem, the decision problem of whether, by looking at any string of code, can you predict whether it is a provable formula or not? And the answer is no. And he got to that answer by inventing what we call the Turing machine. It was a very strange accident that in doing this very abstract problem, he helped develop this very concrete technology. And the Entscheidungsproblem still is what allows us to know that and you guys know all too well, that you can't tell by looking at a code. You have to run the code to really know what it's going to do. There's always going to be strange, unpredictable, not just bugs, but, and that's a very fundamental part of this world we live in, that it's never going to be completely determined. It's going to always, there's always going to be some wildness there, and I think that's important. And so it brings us back to what Leibniz imagined in the beginning, this purely digital universe where everything was binary code. The last picture in the book is me. That's me in the middle, and that's Esther sucking her thumb, and in 1954. So I'm sort of here as not the eyewitness, but to remind everybody where this started, and these sort of very far-thinking ideas of the people who started it. They weren't just trying to do one problem; they were trying to solve all problems. And thanks to all the people who so generously let me go through their stuff. And that's it. We have time for a few questions.
Thanks again for absolutely fascinating talk and in-depth history of this still relatively mythical creation time.
Yes.
I was actually wondering, I mentioned, we've got these myths about the inventor from electricity and the experiments with that, and then the invention of the light bulb. How do you think someday this story will be boiled down to, a very, maybe metaphor, but a concept that even kind of children will be able to accept and embrace as far as the foundations and beginning of modern computation?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's such a problem because people always want to assign it to one person. They want to say Thomas Edison invented the light bulb and Benjamin Franklin, invented electricity, or we somehow. So I don't know how to. I mean, that's why I called the book Turing's Cathedral, because you're trying to give credit to Turing for this very abstract idea, but not say that so and so invented the computer. And there are books. I mean, if you look at how many books there are on who invented the computer and arguments, I don't know what we're going to arrive at as a sort of cultural myth. And I was trying to give a bigger picture of that. This is this very group effort that brought us into a numerical universe in a way that there was a very fundamental transition. But it's like we don't argue about who invented language, right? I mean, nobody's arguing, this guy. No, it was actually his uncle who said the first sentence. We don't care. It's something that happened, but there are huge numbers of academic scientists studying the evolution of language, but we don't try and say somebody invented it. Mm-hmm. So.
And while we wait for any other questions, I did have one other question. That you said there was a bit of prophetic or a sense of transition from this two-dimensional universe you described to a three-dimensional. Can you give us a glimpse of that? Obviously, I look forward to reading it in the book, but any sense of what you mean by stepping into a three-dimensional digital
Sure.
universe?
I mean, I'd love to talk about the future. I'm a historian, so I'm sort of licensed to talk about the past, not the future. But I think there is sort of, and this is making a very simplified generalization, but the Turing model was one-dimensional. The von Neumann implementation was this, which still, if you have an IP address, that's a coordinate in a two-dimensional space. That's why you have the @ sign in the middle. But what the internet has done is give us this more three-dimensional world where machines can be connecting to the same data at the same time. It's no longer flat. So it's become three-dimensional, but we still write most of our programs in a two-dimensional way. And I think the future and the exciting thing of what's going on here, companies like Facebook, all the companies that are doing well, is that they are building new layers of very different kinds of computation on top of that. They're not going to replace the von Neumann substrate. It's like DNA. It's there. But you can do other things on top of it. And a lot of what's being done, and it's a almost unmentionable word to say, but a lot of what you guys are doing is analog computation. And I mean, if you look at the Facebook problem, you've got a small high school, everybody's changing girlfriends and boyfriends every weekend. You cannot digitally code that. It's just too incomprehensibly complex. But if you give everybody a little piece of code and let them connect on Facebook, the map becomes a model. It becomes a model of itself. And that's analog computing, where the complexity is not in the code, but in the connections between the code. And that's a lot of how Google works, because you're finding the links. It's topology, not digital sequence. So that's good.
So you've already made a liar of me. I came here today planning to ask you how come Leibniz and Gödel always fall out of these discussions. Why are they never made part of the story?
Oh, I think Leibniz, it all goes back to Leibniz.
But it all goes back to Leibniz.
Yes.
And Gödel clearly
he-
was asking the questions. I think there's a subtlety that maybe people asking questions in the analog domain, it's not obvious to those of us in computing that these things map across into the digital domain. But I was wondering, I'm trying to ask you something about the historical process, I think. How is it that these great antecedents, the people who pose the questions, don't get a very large slice of the credit themselves?
I don't know. I mean, that's the mystery of history, and you can probably tell I enjoy sort of finding the people like Baricelli who were completely ignored, and bringing them back to life. And the same with Gödel. I think. I mean, if you're looking for early computer programs, I mean, Gödel's 1931 proof is, in many ways, it's a program. It's quite amazing how much. And the funny thing is that he was just sitting there with all this going on around him, and he didn't.
Right.
Play a part.
It was a point of amusement that when I was studying mathematics and the assignment was to go and reconstruct that proof, it turned out the easiest method I had to do it was to write a Lisp interpreter in arithmetic, and then everything followed.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a very good question, and I'm glad I saved myself from you.
Well, again, to make sure we have a little bit of time left for book signing, and again, make sure you talk to the book sync people in the back. Let's give one more round of applause to George Dyson.
Thank you.